All right, we are live and good morning, everybody. This is Friday, February 11th. This is Senate Transportation Committee. And we got a few items on our agenda this morning, and we're going to start off with Charles Baker, Executive Director of Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. Good morning, Charles.
Hey, good morning, and Charlie is fine. Thank you.
Charlie, okay. Charlie, good morning. And I know you had asked to give us a little update on some of the things that are happening on the I89 study updates. And so I think the committee would like to hear that. So go right ahead and take it away. And thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to the committee for giving me time. And Jeannie, if you can give me screen sharing ability, I will. And doesn't look like I have permission yet. I'll talk for a minute.
Well, we have to wait. We have to wait for Senator Chittenden to okay it. Senator Chittenden has to okay it first. Okay? Oh, look at that picture. There we go.
All right, there you are. I89 looking north from exit 14. So I believe I briefed the committee last year on, and that was at a time when we were looking at a number of interchange options that we were looking at. Since that time, we've kind of largely finished that phase of work, but have kind of turned to, okay, what do we do to reduce demand on the highway network? And so we kind of termed this has a couple names here, apologies, but we've been calling it Bundle 2, but it was also really transportation climate actions. And I think I'm sure given the Climate Council's work, some of this may be of interest and very related to that work. So here's just kind of, I'm going to give you a little bit of background and then kind of how all this substance was developed. Jonathan Slayson is here with me. He's a director from RSG consulting firm who really did the hard work on the mechanics here. So he'll kind of delve into some more detail about telework and this strategic model that he and his team developed. And then we'll kind of just talk about the summary conclusions of it and what's happening next.
Thank you.
Yeah, please, let me know if you have questions, as I'm sure you will. And I feel a little guilty because I know you only hear about this once a year. So, but here's the 7 tasks that we're working on in this I89 study. And I should really start with, why did we even start this? And it was really when we did our last transportation plan, we saw that there was, in the future, 2050, not that exit 14 isn't congested now, but it gets even worse to the point where it's really over capacity if trends continue. And so we started this study. We've set goals and a vision with a whole advisory committee. I just mentioned that last time we met with you, we were looking at the interchanges. And I know Senator Chittenden has seen a lot of those presentations in the spring. We spent a lot of time with South Burlington on this. We're now in task 5, really looking at alternatives. And so, as I said, this is kind of looking at alternatives other than major tens of millions of dollars of investments in the highway itself. And then we'll kind of turn to wrapping this up with an implementation plan and a final report in the next 2 phases. And just to kind of repeat on these, what we came to with the interchanges was a possibility of improving something at exit 14 and exit 13, turning that into like a full interchange, and possibly a new interchange at what has been termed 12B, but it's where State Route 116 crosses 89. And so here, this is in a little bit more of a graphic. We're focused right now on these alternatives to capacity, transit, biking, walking, other transportation demand management and policies. And then we're going to look at how those things bundle together with the interchange investment possibilities. So over this past summer, fall, this is the group that kind of helped us with this phase of the work. We had folks that are coming from more of an equity perspective, from a transportation equity coalition that exists in Chittenden County, from VTrans, from Williston, South Burlington, GMT, Burlington Electric, CATMA, Local Motion, the Conservation Law Foundation, and Sustainable Transportation Vermont, and of course, staff here and with the consultant team. And they really kind of helped define what's in what you're going to see here in a minute. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Jonathan to kind of talk about the substance of the work, and starting off with the telework.
Great. Thanks, Charlie.
Oh, sorry.
Good morning.
Great. Good morning. Thank you, Senators. So we'll start off with the teleworking analysis, which was a simplified approach because this is a very complex discussion and is also very nascent in terms of its evaluation of the impacts, even though it feels like we've all been affected by the pandemic and the ability to telework for a few of us. So we've been evaluating what the impacts are. RSG has been conducting
two vaccines and one booster.
Oh, sorry.
Hold on, Jeannie, you're not.
Well,
Jeannie, you're not muted.
So I'm coming in next week for that.
Jeannie, you're not muted. There you go.
All right, great. Don't want to talk over anybody. So RSG's been focusing on teleworking during the pandemic. We instituted some national surveys, one of which is actually paid for by the state of Vermont. We surveyed a number of Vermonters, but we've been surveying over 26,000 US residents over 9 different waves. And through that work, we've been able to identify these patterns in job occupation and their propensity to telework, which is what we're calling working from home. And while the terminology here, I think, has evolved, this was kind of the initial phase of it that we grouped them into these 3 bundles: professional, on-site, and mixed. And these 3 categories represent the relative propensity for those in those job categories there on the left as to whether they're eligible to telework. And this represented from empirical data that we observed over the early phases and throughout the pandemic thus far. So Charlie, go ahead. Thank you. So this chart here shows that there were 2 scenarios that were developed. There was a second scenario. So I'm jumping to the second scenario first. And this represents kind of our peak teleworking scenario that happened during the May timeframe of 2020, where we had a significant shutdown of a lot of not only businesses, but also recreation activities and other activities around. And we realized that there was about a 52% reduction in daily commuter VMT. And based on the data that was collected throughout 2020 and then throughout 2021, we've seen a dramatic decline in the level of teleworking. And so we feel comfortable that scenario 2 was representing probably a relative peak, because we realized from that previous chart, there's a fair number of our employees in the state and also nationally that don't have an option to telework. And so we realized that of those that do, they were mostly teleworking. And that's what that result of that scenario 2 reduction looks like. So looking at a more practical, longer term solution, we decided that a scenario 1, we termed it, was more likely. And this was more of a stable condition, that it's about what's happening today. And we expect this to continue to the future. And so this scenario 1 represents about 11% reduction in daily commuter vehicle miles traveled. And that is basically the propensity of those who can telework. There's a weighted representation of the employee mix within Vermont, and particularly in the northwestern part of Vermont, that we think that would represent basically a 50% increase of teleworking relative to today. And so that has been built into our strategy here. That's part of the work that's being discussed today.
Yeah, and I'll just add, you can kind of see on this chart kind of the percentages of full-time commuting pre-pandemic, and the percentages for 1 to 2 days, 3 to 4 days, or full-time teleworking pre-pandemic. And this scenario 1 is in the yellow bar here. Sorry,
Thanks,
John.
Charlie. No, that's great. And that represents kind of the weighted mix of our employee mix. So what is a strategic model? And so I'm going to try to walk this through. Vermont has made actually an investment in this tool in the past. In 2014, Vermont was part of a pilot that instituted a very early stage of this model. And since then, it has evolved. It is a tool that is built all around scenario planning. And it is meant to be able to analyze a wide range of modeling scenarios and policies that otherwise are not able to be modeled in more of our traditional travel demand models. And so in the Chittenden County area, in the MPO area, we have a travel demand model that has been used for years, and it's a quality travel model. And that forecasts how many cars, how many users, and where they are on the network. What road are they traveling on? In order to assess different policies and investment strategies, namely those such as carbon taxes, maybe road miles, travel taxes, maybe different changes in parking behavior and the availability of increased transit subsidies, all of these types of softer policies, we need something else to model them. And so a strategic model has been developed for that very purpose. And it's built on an econometric model, which uses various explanatory variables, such as your household characteristics, your income, where you live, how many vehicles you have, how many people are working in your household. All of these characteristics are estimating how much travel would you demand. And in that way, we can then forecast how you might be affected by these various policy levers. So if we go through quickly the steps here, is that we first start with our goals and objectives. The I89 project has a goal that we want to reduce the vehicle miles traveled and also support our climate change, climate goals by reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. By identifying what goals, we then link it to what outcomes we're following at the very far end of this on the right-hand side of the screen. We link these two pieces by these key drivers of change. We realize that the world is changing around us. It's rapidly evolving. We're now looking at incorporating a range of new considerations into transportation planning that only 10, 15 years ago we were considering, but we didn't have the quantitative methods to assess their impacts. Then we're able to say, how do these drivers of change affect our various investment packages? And so how can we start to influence and guide our investments so that we can achieve our desired outcomes? And that's what that third category is, that we've looked at a range of different investment packages through this tool that gives us some insight to say which of these has a more or less effect to help us achieve our desired outcomes. So quickly, just in the model region here, we've taken a Northwest Vermont area, and really this is about the commuter shed into the Burlington-Chittenden County area. We wanted to affect people's households' travel behavior. And so we needed to have a model region that included where people live and how where they work influences their travel behavior. We have a lot more granularity in Chittenden County, and then it's a little bit more spread out in the other 5 surrounding counties. But it's a comprehensive model that covers a wide geography. So getting into some of the nuts and bolts here, that we evaluated various levels or ranges of values across those different infrastructure options that we had said earlier. So along the top there, sorry, Charlie, we have land use and community design. How do we affect our land uses? Then we talk about bike and transit. We talk about different travel demand, and I'll talk a little bit more detail what those are in just a second. Pricing, and how might we be affected if our income disparities change, if we become more or less equal in our per capita income. We also talked about how commercial and heavy vehicles might affect our greenhouse gas emission goals. Then we have these 4 different levels, so to speak, and they are just simply magnitudes of these investment strategies. So here's kind of a mix of the matrix of various options, and we can do kind of a plug and play here to say which of these do we want to test. And what happens is that we're able to combine these in really exciting ways, and I'll discuss that in a minute. I want to make sure we're just comfortable with kind of the terminology. Community design, we're talking about mixed use and smart growth development. For bike and transit, we're talking about increasing the infrastructure and ability for those to maybe use e-bikes and travel much further than they currently do today, and make it much more accessible. Transit, we're looking at doubling or increasing by 50% and then a tripling of transit. So we've taken this to a high bar and said, what degree of impact might we realize if we make that significant investment in our transit infrastructure? In terms of the pricing, we've explored various options. All of this is predicated on a 2050 planning horizon. So we do have an assumption that there's a lot more electric vehicles in the mix than there are today. And so we looked at carbon taxes as a further reinforcement to price different diesel-based or carbon-based fuels. We looked at how the doubling cost of the fuel itself might affect travel behavior, because we don't know what will happen in the future. We've explored these different ranges of values. But we also then considered a mileage-based fee, which would be, we could talk about the magnitude in a little bit later. As I mentioned, we explored income. We realized that we didn't want to encourage a particular income strategy, but it was asked particular of our equity partners here to say, what happens if we shrink or increase the middle class, and whether our income disparities increase or decrease. And then we discussed how ride hailing, so the Ubers and Lyfts, and whether they become much more available and whether their cost changes and how that affects travel behavior. Also, just whether the electrification of the medium and heavy duty fleets, how that affects our travel. So there was a lot there. What we do is combine all of those matrix options and we multiply them all together, and we get 431 scenarios for the future. And what this does is it's a scenario planning tool. It gives us the ability to say, we don't know what the future looks like, but given a calibration of today's travel behaviors and then testing how we can influence those behaviors across these different investment strategies along the top, we can then look at the bottom in this case to say, if we care about a particular policy objective, increasing transit trips, decreasing air pollution emissions, changing the potential share or the burden on low-income households and how much daily miles they're required to drive. These are different policy objectives that we can focus on using this tool. And as I mentioned from the start, daily vehicle miles traveled seemed to be one of the most, the strongest indicator that we wanted to focus on, because it really was connected to congestion. And then, at least today, it's highly correlated with air pollution because of our fuel mix.
And I think just, I know this is a lot here to digest. Yeah, so this model is going to be able to be used. You can either decide to like look at the impact of one of those policies or investments up top, or you can kind of focus more on the outcome, which is what we were doing. Sorry, John.
No, great. And so it is not a prediction or a forecast of the future, but what's really powerful and why I think we're here today is that it's a helpful instrument to help us guide. If we have a goal in mind, we have a tool here that gives us new insights in investments and strategies that we otherwise previously haven't had. And we can say, to reach a particular goal, what might the inputs be? What might the investments and the policies be that will give us a good chance to reaching that goal? This one scenario highlights that out of that goal-seeking exercise, we can narrow it down to our preferred one scenario. And so now we can show you the next slide, which shows you the results of that matrix, and to say these were the policies that were investigated to say had the highest success toward reaching our goal of the lower VM daily vehicle miles traveled. What we realize is that we need greater community design attention. That means mix of uses in a smaller area so we can walk and bike. It means more a denser environment. It means that we can get more people to take transit because you're located in a hub. You don't need to go too far afield. We realize that we need to increase significantly our active travel trips. So in this case, it was a doubling of walking and biking trips. We realize that we need to dramatically increase our transit. We know that we have to also encourage those who can and are able to participate in travel demand management. That would be continuing a high degree of teleworking. It would also be rewarding those who can walk and bike if they don't need a parking space. Maybe it's some parking payout. There's tax structures, there's other policy levers that are all part of that transportation demand management. And we're fortunate to have CATMA, the Chittenden Area Transportation Management Association, that is a professional entity that guides residential and commercial businesses to improve their TDM activities. And I know they want to kind of grow more throughout the state and move away from the Northwest. We're looking at more paid parking. Will influence more people to take transit and walking and biking. We going to the far right is that we are assuming that there's going to be a dramatic increase in electric vehicles. That correlates with the climate action plan predictions, or I guess forecasts. And so in order to, if we're not paying for fuel taxes anymore, looking at pricing, how do we pay for our transportation infrastructure? Shifting to a mileage-based fee is basically essential. And we looked at various magnitudes of that fee and what types of magnitudes would result in the behavior change that we're looking for.
How would you, just a quick question, how would you capture all the tourists that come into the state of Vermont if you went on a mileage fee?
Yeah, at this point, Senator Mazza, that difficult question, we could pontificate here, and I think
Okay.
you've all been thinking about it, but it is
Yeah.
not built into that assumption.
Okay.
We are focusing just on those households and employees that are in this model area, but this
Okay.
is 2050.
Yeah.
I hope that we have some national standards at that point.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that one's really hard without Congress stepping
Yeah.
up to that.
I would think so, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think, we may just tag team a little bit here. And this is just, again, this is very focused on how do we get to the biggest reduction in vehicle miles travel. This is not saying that these things will happen or that they're easy, to your point, Senator Mazza, or even necessarily likely, but these are the kinds of things that need to be considered by policymakers, whether that's, municipal, regional, state, and even federal, of course, when we're talking about that mileage fee. So this is what the package kind of looks like to get to that best VMT result. Increasing teleworking by 50%, as Jonathan reviewed, increasing land use density and design. And we had already kind of set out a goal in our transportation planning of having 90% of new housing units in areas where the towns have planned for growth, right? Mostly where they have water and sewer services. Doubling trips by bike, tripling the transit services, doubling the participation in TDM programs, and increasing the cost of parking in downtowns and village centers. And then that mileage-based fee. Putting all that together and seeing how they interact and support each other. And we're kind of doing this work now. We're starting to kind of marry it up with the travel demand model to get a better sense of VMT reduction. But we think it's between a 10 to 20% VMT reduction. Again, if policymakers at all levels, invest in these efforts. So, and you can kind of hear me, I hope. I'm struggling a little bit with how to characterize this. Is this the desired future? I guess if VMT reduction is your major goal, then yes, it is, and how much of this is achievable? I think that is the challenge, I think that in front of us and broadly as to how, if and how we can achieve these kinds of reductions in travel. So any questions on this? That's the end of the substance before I get back into process.
Any questions, committee? A lot to digest.
Yeah, and just be aware, I think the bottom line is we have this model now and we can kind of play around with all kinds of different things. You could look at just the potential impact of one of these ideas if you wanted. So please be in touch as you're thinking about different policy initiatives. And of course, we'll work more with VTrans and make sure they're fully integrated with this. They've seen it a little bit, but I think we're all right now in the process still of digesting it and thinking about how to use this tool. We did have a public meeting where we reviewed this a couple of weeks ago on January 26th. We just had the advisory committee met on, I think it was Tuesday this week. And they voted to kind of support further evaluation of this recommended policies and investments you just saw. And we actually had unanimous support, which hasn't always happened at that committee. Just in terms of what's happening next with the 89 study, as I mentioned, we're trying to integrate this work into our travel demand model. So then we can really see the impact like on I89 main line at exit 14 and other locations. And then we'll start running some scenarios where we combine this work up with the interchange investments and really try to get a sense of what works best. I think we're probably not going to be able to take, and I think we've been getting some guidance from V-Trans and Federal Highway that we shouldn't try to resolve which interchange is the best investment to make at this point, because it's going to go through NEPA and that alternatives process. So all three of these investment locations are going to be on the table when that process starts. And frankly, I think we're running into some real challenges coming to closure. So Senator Chittenden may want to weigh in on that more. And then we're trying to wrap this study up by summertime. We'll probably have a public meeting April, May, advisory committee meeting in May to talk about how all this starts to look fit together. And then one last little side note here on this last bullet. You may remember we looked at the whole length of 89 in Chittenden County and interchanges, and a couple of things that came up early on was Milton and Bolton. There was a little interest in both those communities of having new interchanges. There wasn't great support on the advisory committee to really make them one of the primary recommendations coming out of this study, but there was a little bit of like, could you take another look at what's happened? Those interchanges, Bolton was in like, I think final design or maybe getting ready even to go to construction back, I'm not sure, 80s or maybe early 90s. I don't know, Senator Mazzi, you may have more history.
I know the Milton one's been talked about for many years.
Yeah,
I know that one's been, but.
And then Milton had some conceptual designs prepared, again, 2 or 3 decades ago. So we kind of dusted those off and did a technical review as to how well they comply with existing environmental and current design standards. So we'll share that information with the towns and V-Trans if there is interest at some point in the future in those interchanges. So I didn't think we could get through all this in less than 30 minutes, but I think we did. So happy to take any questions or
Senator
Chittenden,
because this is right in your part of town, any comments?
I'll just say, God, you all are doing a great job as usual, Charlie. And since we talked about Beta yesterday, which was in Chittenden County, I don't want to talk too much about Chittenden County because people might think we're giving it too much attention relative to the rest of the state. But
they might think you're from Chittenden County, right?
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Looks great, Charlie.
No, thank you,
Senator Kitchell, this is not near your area, is it?
No, I went on mute because Henry was yowling.
Oh, Henry, okay.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is, boy, Chittenden County sure gets the traffic. Every time you drive over there, you realize how.
Well, that exit between 13, 14, 15, 16, oh my God. And now 17 is going to be done over. Your hand's not doing well, is it? Wow.
No, it isn't really doing well. How do you like my, I didn't have any, I don't know what this tape is for. Maybe electrical. I don't think it's medicinal, but it was the best I could do.
Oh boy.
It really does look.
Oh, that's painful. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? I know to a lot of you folks you say, well, Chittenden County, but there is a lot of traffic. And, when you haven't done anything to it in the last 50 years or so, it makes a difference. And traffic but we're going through such a difficult time because of people working at home and gasoline prices. And it's hard to project anything at this state.
What will the working at home goal mean in terms of, because we've been hearing that rental property, as more people are working from home, it has had a impact on downsizing what people need for office space. Is there, that's probably, and part of your analysis, I would think, is those collateral impacts of the policies in all areas of the economy. I was just wondering about that particular objective, or whatever you want to call it, goal to increase telework.
Jonathan, you want to take first shot?
Sure. I think first off, in this particular study, those collateral effects are probably not being identified, but there's been a lot of work, and RSG has been part of it. We have a significant study under Massachusetts right now, which is evaluating some of those secondary and tertiary effects. And there's definitely evidence to say For instance, all around the Cape, there's been dramatic shifts in where people are living, and then even an increase now where people say they want to move, now that there's going to be a greater awareness to say, now I can work remotely. Are you saying that full time? And now we're going to see a second wave of this, I think, is what's being apparent. And so this hasn't settled out yet for it by any means. In terms of the commercial space, I think we might see some change in land use. However, space is not going to sit empty. It's going to still generate trips. It's going to be filled with people. They may not be the same office dwellers, and any their business might downsize a percentage, but the space is still going to be used. And whether that creates new opportunities for new businesses to move in. So I think we have not seen all of this settle out by any means. So it's hard for us to put a quantitative impact on Vermont or any other jurisdiction at this point.
Yeah,
I think you have to look elsewhere in the country as far as exactly what you just said. I mean, you go into some of these big places, you know, occasionally when we do travel out of state, you just wonder how all those storefronts can stay in business. I mean, they're just storefront after storefront after storefront, and something that you don't think is very relative in a high rent district. They're paying the payments, they're in business, and they're there. So to keep a light on that is very smart, I think.
Yeah, I think we saw some information from Allen Brooks and Minor. You know, they do some commercial or commercial market resident or sorry, they look at the real estate market. That's the word I was looking for. And in Chittenden County, and I think they're expecting to see kind of a higher vacancy rate, certainly for office space, you know, in the coming years. And so, you know, I think there'll be a question of how it's absorbed. And I think there's even some question about, as Jonathan said, that it may be occupied. It may not be occupied with business. I think we may see some office buildings, you know, convert to more mixed use. Let's have some residential on the upper floors if you got a big building or something, right? So it'll be interesting to see how the real estate market evolves from this point. You're absolutely right.
I worry about the malls. You know, look at University Mall. You walk through it, and they're hurting. There's no doubt about it. During the week, there's nobody there. And,
malls are getting totally redefined.
Terrible, because I love shopping there, but well, you can walk through there sometime and see just a dozen people. You know, it's just that you don't wonder how they're paying the rent. Some, I guess, aren't. Senator Chittenden.
I want to start rethinking how we look at malls. That's the only indoor downtown in Vermont, I like to say. And if we start, maybe put a post office in there, if the mall could do it, you know, a rec center, some municipal services, there's ways to have that space be more public and commercial enterprises. And that way year round, you have a place that you can go to. So that's what I'm always planting a seed in people's minds with the University Mall.
You have to,
Senator Chittenden, don't they have the library out there?
We did, but then we built a new one down the street for $20 million. But it was nice. People actually really liked it. They could get a cup of coffee. I thought it was
generating some traffic there. You know,
they could go to Target and then go to the library with a kid. Right. They loved it.
Yes. Okay. Anybody else?
Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Well, thank you for a good overview. I appreciate that. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have Jeannie? Can we get Matt Musgrave?
Let me see if he's available immediately.
Okay, let's see if he's there.
Are we taking up the front? Because I see Mr. Sox is here. So
we're taking up the franchise, the last item, and he's just here in case we have a question.
Oh, okay. All right. I was just wondering. Of course,
we have the other folks here, but in case of the question. Yeah.
I just want you to know I'm cost conscious, and I'm sure he's here on billable hours. So I was concerned about.
Well, that was up to the dealers of Vermont. So.
Okay. All right, Marilyn.
Senator, I'll let them know you were looking out for them.
Oh, there he is. Good morning. Yeah, but you know, it's he's probably getting $10 an hour these days. You know, it's hard.
That's right. Times are tough.
Times are tough.
Okay. Oh, is that legislative pay?
Yeah.
I don't think it's even 10. I'm not even sure it's minimum wage at this point if you factor in all the other time.
We're waiting for, to see if Jeannie can get Matt a couple of minutes earlier.
I've sent him an email, but.
Okay.
Back from him.
Well, committee, it's Friday, so you got the weekend to relax now, see?
You have time to go get a cup of coffee?
Sure, run get a cup of coffee. Go ahead. Anybody want to have let's take a 5-minute break here, and we'll get back at in a quarter of. That's when he was scheduled for. So go right ahead.
Run up to Colchester to get a pie.
Yeah, come on. I'd give you a free one this morning. So, yeah.
Shall I stop the live stream?